Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Today we're discussing the Kinmen incident, in which 2 Chinese men died in Taiwan's waters after trying to escape the Taiwan Coast Guard. Joining us today are Wen-Chin, Academia Sinica Institute of Political Science, a research fellow, and Huang Kuei-bo, National Chengchi University Center for Global and Regional Risk Assessment at the College of International Affairs, Professor and Director, and Chen Ping-kuei, National Chengchi University Department of Diplomacy Associate Professor. Very warm welcome to the show, everyone, today.
Thank you.
On the last day of the Lunar New Year holiday, on February 14th, around Taiwan's Kinmen Island, a nameless and unregistered vessel was spotted entering Taiwan's restricted zone, marked here in black, bordering the prohibited territorial waters marked here in orange. Here's what we know. A Taiwan Coast Guard vessel signals to the boat to stop for inspection, but the boat refuses and commences evasive zigzagging. The Taiwan Coast Guard says the boat makes a sharp right turn and capsizes. A 2.5-hour search and rescue operation begins with 7 Coast Guard boats, saving 3 of the 4 men on board. One of the 3 is unconscious. Divers eventually find the final man without signs of life. In response to this incident, China says the vessel capsized because it was rammed by the Taiwan Coast Guard. Beijing denies the existence of Taiwan's territorial waters because it claims Taiwan is part of China. Beijing therefore rejects the restricted or prohibited zones, which have been observed since 1992. China announces the start of law enforcement patrols between Kinmen and Xiamen. Some Chinese vessels enter Taiwan's prohibited zone. On February 19th, a Taiwanese tourist boat that veered into Chinese waters was subject to a 30-minute inspection by 6 Chinese Coast Guard officials amid an increasing number of warship-sized Chinese vessels patrolling the waters. Professor Chen, let me come to you first. So I'd like to know what you think are the key points to grasp in this incident itself.
Okay, the key point is that this incident is very unfortunate, but it is not uncommon. Similar incidents like this happens between countries a lot. However, it depends on the countries to resolve these incidents. This is clearly an accident on the sea, and it needs the authorities to talk to each other and try to resolve the situation. And usually this involves the civilian organizations to help negotiation. But right now, the negotiation is underway. We're still waiting for further information about this.
So by that, do you mean that it's the Coast Guard that's handling this issue as opposed to military?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Professor Wu, how about your points to grasp from this incident?
Yeah, again, I think this is a very unfortunate event, and I think that the intrusion probably may be intentional for those fishermen, but the death may be accidental. And I think the Chinese government is taking advantage of this opportunity to have some political action against Taiwan or Taiwan's sovereignty.
Okay, and we'll come to that a little bit later.
Sure.
Professor Huang, how about you?
I think one of the key points is that the past mutual tacit understanding between the 2 sides of the strait, and also the patience and the space allowed under the principle of the One China or under the consensus of 1992 have been ruined. That is, when Kinmen enjoyed some prohibited or restricted water for Kinmen fishermen to operate, that was under some goodwill expressed by both sides, that Taiwan side, draw the line for my own people to operate, to fish, while your people can do whatever you want outside this operating line. There's no formal or oral agreement between the 2 sides' government, but things just happened. So in the past, both Kinmen fishermen and Xiamen fishermen or Fujian fishermen could operate basically within their own regulatory domains or waters. But now, these tacit understanding or these past good old days have gone. So I think that's the most unfortunate, and I think both governments across the strait should pay more attention to this importance for fishermen to fish, other than to get involved in these sovereignty disputes, or this dispute could be upgraded into the unnecessary cross-strait conflicts.
Are you making any assessment of who has changed that status quo?
The status quo has been changed by the Beijing side, because the line drawn by the Taiwan side has been there, as I said, without formal or oral agreement. But Beijing just said, okay, you guys, just do not go over the line drawn by Taiwan, and you have to keep away from that line. That happened in the 1990s. So I think Beijing, using this unfortunate incident to overthrow what Beijing had tacit understanding about, and also Beijing would like to reassure that Beijing has the control over the path of cross-strait relations.
Professor Chen, we have described in the media quite widely described the boat as a fishing boat and the men as fishermen, but the boat wasn't a fishing boat. It was a speedboat.
It was a speedboat, yes.
And it was completely unnamed and unidentified. And the men were evidently trying to escape the Taiwan Coast Guard inspection, and very unfortunately, that became fatal. What other reasons could there be to explain what they were doing?
So usually those unmanned unidentified vessels are conducting illegal activities such as smuggling or illegal fishing. So even a small speedboat can do fishing, right? So they can do transactions on the speedboat as well. So it is likely they're doing something that they don't want people to know. Otherwise, they will not be worried about being identified, and they don't have to flee away when our Coast Guard pursued it. Now, the problem is this is not an organized event activity, right? So this is obviously a individual boats that are doing its own business. We do not know the nature of their actions right now. We may probably never know about it. However, we know this is not purposefully done by the mainland government. We know that Beijing is not trying to conduct an event or create an accident there.
Okay, that's very clear. Professor Huang, can we just mention there is such a thing as Chinese maritime militia. We know a lot about them in the South China Sea. They're actually a permanent phenomenon there and part of China's civil military fusion strategy. In any conflict, what is the status of these fishermen?
Actually, that's in generally called a gray zone area or gray zone area operations. We cannot rule out the possibility that mainland Chinese authorities, was trying to test the upcoming Lai Ching-te administration over the tension or conflict management across the Taiwan Strait. But as Professor Chen just mentioned, I also think this is not a purposeful action organized by the mainland Chinese authorities, but an individual incident that, an unidentified vessel from Fujian province cruised towards Kinmen, which actually caused some national security concern on the Taiwan side. And that brought up some unfortunate developments as we have seen. And also, I think in terms of the militia operations, yes, mainland Chinese authorities have trained some, so-called fisher soldiers in order to help the military to facilitate some operations. That is why I think in Kinmen or in Matsu, our Coast Guard have paid more and more attention to these possibly related events in order to safeguard the territorial waters and the related rights.
Okay, Professor Chen?
I want to add that the so-called maritime militias, they are auxiliary and reserve forces of PLA. They have training from the PLA, but they are civilians. Their ships are owned by private companies usually registered in Guangdong or Hainan area. So they operate in South China Sea mainly. In this incident, we do not see any ships or crew from the maritime militia in China.
Okay, so we're quite clear that we don't think that they are part of that. Professor Wu, you spoke about how it was an accident that happened, but now China is possibly using the incident for its own political ends. Now, Zhu Fenglian, spokesman for China's Taiwan Affairs Office, described Taiwan's aggressive expulsion of Chinese fishing boats as triggering broad indignation across China. So, and they demanded, the Chinese side demanded the Taiwan Coast Guard apologize and be punished. What is China aiming to convey with this sort of rhetoric?
I think the rhetoric will be serving for two purposes. One is for the Chinese nationalism, because nowadays the death of Chinese fishermen. So domestically in China, people may be angry at this accident. So the government should be using some tough rhetoric against Taiwan on this matter.
Professor Huang, do you want to comment about that?
According to a statistic provided by the DPP government a few days ago, during the past years when Ma Ying-jeou was in office, actually the fishing boats from the Chinese mainland were detained for more than 10,000 vessels. But during for this 7.5 years when President Tsai has been in office, only some 400 incidents where mainland Chinese vessels were detained. So I think these problems have been existing for many years, but it depends on the way the authorities operate and to function in order to get rid of unnecessary loss of lives while safeguarding the security and lives of each other.
But from those statistics, it seems to have improved recently. Is that right?
No, the statistics show that the Taiwan administrations detained way fewer vessels than the Ma Ying-jeou administration did. So Taiwan detained for about some 400, and Ma Ying-jeou administration detained more than 10,000.
Professor Chen, on February 19th, as I mentioned at the start of the show, a Taiwanese tourist vessel, it was called the King Sha, had 23 passengers, 11 crew on board, veered outside of Taiwan's waters. This is obviously in the waters around Kinmen.
Right.
It was subject to a half-hour inspection, causing panic among those on board. Now, Taiwan's Ocean Affairs Council director said that China's Coast Guard hurt our people's feelings and caused people to panic. Can you provide us with what you believe are instructive points of comparison between these two incidents, one by the Taiwan Coast Guard, one by the Chinese Coast Guard?
So these incidents are clearly not isolated, right? So the inspection is a response to the clash incident. So it is true that it seems like the Chinese Coast Guard is trying to intimidate the Taiwanese authority. This kind of action hints that there might be more inspections surrounding the Kinmen area, and this is of course something that the people in Kinmen or people in Taiwan don't want to see. So this is of course a warning, but I wouldn't say it is very strong because we have only seen it once, and the inspection is pretty smooth. We don't have any incidents or coercion during the inspection. So
it could have been a lot worse.
It could be a lot worse.
As in taking them to the Chinese side?
Not that worse. I think there might be more troublesome inspections, such as confiscating personal items or accusing for smuggling. And this might be more troublesome. And it is hard to imagine that the Chinese Coast Guard will bring people to mainland directly. Although we cannot exclude this possibility, but it is hard to imagine that Chinese authority have the excuse or have the has the authority to do this.
Okay, Professor Wu, how about you? Points of comparison between these two Coast Guard incidents?
I think of course, there are some similarity between two cases, but there are some major differences. One is that the accident for the Chinese side, it was illegal intrusion of the prohibited water of Taiwan. So that's why Taiwanese Coast Guard can inspect the fish boat. But for the tourist boat from Taiwan, so it's totally different in the case.
But it went into the Chinese waters, I understand.
Yeah, but I guess that's common in the Xiaosantong, the practice, or I'm not sure, but I heard from my friend that they sometimes have tourist activities between Kinmen and Xiamen, something like that. And the other issue is that I think China need to respond a little bit to the accident, the first accident. So it's understandable that they will inspect the Chinese tourists, Taiwanese tourists in that case.
Yeah, because they're playing to a domestic audience that.
But I don't think at this moment Chinese government will escalate the tension because it might backfire. For example, for Taiwanese people, they might be scary of visiting China or doing such a tourism activity anymore. So I don't think Chinese government will escalate such activities in the following months.
And Professor Huang, perhaps the greatest distinction is how each boat reacted to being, or the attempt at being accosted, the attempt to be stopped by the Coast Guard. Do you want to make any points about comparison?
You know, it's very mysterious in the case of Kinmen, because according to the newest information brought by the Chinese side, they said that this unidentified vessel or boat actually stopped when the Taiwanese Coast Guard approached. And then the unidentified vessels was hit and overthrown. So if that is the case, and because Taiwan doesn't have the video file to demonstrate the truth, so I think that will be another big point for further debate in the future. But in the case of Taiwan's tourist boats intruding into the waters controlled by the mainland Chinese authorities, then I think that's just as you and Professor Wu said, a response to the Kinmen event, and that's for the domestic consumption. And also, as I said just now, it would be one of the way to impose pressure on the upcoming Lai-Ching administration.
Okay. Professor Chen, how effective do you believe China's use of what we've talked about, essentially trying to erase, any territorial waters around Kinmen, so the restricted, prohibited waters, it's kind of part of grey zone tactics, as some analysts have called it. How effective do you think this is in terms of it undermining Taiwan's sovereignty?
I think how effective it is depends on Taiwan's response, right? If Taiwan responds with strong force and we have very robust law enforcement, maybe we can intimidate further intrusion. Let me emphasize again, these kind of intrusions are very, very common. And our Coast Guard try to expel or detain those ships very regularly. So it is very, very common that these kind of conflict may occur. Now the problem right now is that if Beijing feels like it needs to send out fishery administration vessels or even police vessels to protect their fishermen, that will be another point of escalation, and that will be very serious. So far, we don't see another attempt from the Chinese authority to approach or cross the restricted waters. So I think we have reason to be optimistic about that. China is not trying to test the restricted water line. Then we might see these kind of events a lot in the future. But that's the key. I do not think that China will get any good out of it by sending more ships to test the restricted water.
So that is a pattern that is not what you see is happening right now.
I don't see that. I don't think it will continue to happen in the future.
So you think it will die down?
They will. We have reason to worry about that because if this incident are not settled in the right way, we might see more provocative move from the Chinese side.
Right.
However, if there is a chance to settle down the incident, I think the Chinese government will be able to speak to their domestic audience and settle down the incident.
So Professor Wu, that's interesting. Professor Chen doesn't think it will become a new normal, but this is what many analysts are saying.
Of course, we don't have any concrete evidence to say that China is doing that for purpose, but I think there's another type of interpretation for that, because now we know that China is sending aircraft cruising around the Taiwan Strait. And it seems that Taiwanese people are less concerned about those military units so far. And although the Ministry of Defense releases information almost every day on those military aircraft intrusion into the Taiwan Strait. So in this case, probably if China is going to do something, then using those civil unit or civil fishermen to intrude Taiwanese territory or water would have some other political advantage. But I think we all agree that there is no urgent need for the Chinese government to gain those political advantages right now. So, but we can interpret that China might use this kind of civil intrusion into Taiwan's water or territory sometime in the future if it seems that it's necessary to do so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to ask Professor Huang, because what I understood from your earlier response was that Beijing has changed the status quo. It's used this as an excuse to essentially erase any kind of agreement or acknowledgement of sovereignty by the ROC. So your view would seem to contrast with the other professors' views, is that correct? Because then that would be the new norm, right? It wouldn't then go back to being how it was before.
Yes. I'm not sure whether or not a new norm will be formed after this series of events, but there's a possibility because, the prohibited and restricted waters of Kinmen and Mazu have been formed under the understanding of 1992, as I said. So since 1992 consensus has gone, then mainland Chinese authorities probably have lost its patience and try to move forward in a very assertive way. And this unfortunate incident, as we mentioned, is a trigger for the further move made by the mainland Chinese authorities. And now I think the Coast Guard of mainland China has claimed or has announced that it is going to conduct the regular operations in the waters of Kinmen and Mazu, which actually breaks up the status quo the both sides used to possess at the same time. And if you recall what happened after Nancy Pelosi's visit last August, actually mainland Chinese announcement of those 6 exercise areas, some of which actually have covered part of Taiwan's territorial waterlines, and that's another intrusion of mainland Chinese sovereignty into the ROC's sovereign space. So I think this kind of development is not, of course, helpful for the maintenance of status quo. And if these events occur once again, then of course a new normal will emerge and cross-strait issues will turn sour and sour.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Wen-Chin, Huang Kuei-bo and Chen Ping-kuei for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.